the field is changing.
Yes.
It's really changing. And I am seeing I'm sure you are too, so much evidence of this, especially in the last 5 years. I feel so encouraged by that and glad because I think we're moving away from some of the systems and approaches and interventions and theories and all that are really harmful to people. And at the same time, I know that there's this resistance therapists have to working differently. And so I just think we're in some sort of transition with that, with a lot of therapists like death gripping onto the one-on-one hour.
Hey, Lane.
Hi, Sarah.
I have had the Muppet Show theme song stuck in my head for the past day, and the day before that, it was the DuckTales song, which I think we've already outed you to listeners before that you and I do not have the same musical references whatsoever. And
No.
if you haven't, listeners, heard the DuckTales theme song, do yourself a favor and Google it. That song fucking rocks. And it was in my head all day yesterday. Muppets, not so much a rock and roll, but the DuckTales one, very soulful.
Indeed.
Did you enjoy it? Because I sent it to you.
Yep, I did. I watched it. I laughed. It felt vaguely familiar. So I'm sure I've heard it at some point, but now I know for sure.
Now, I was texting with my brother and was like, my assistant doesn't know this song. He's like, how does a Zoomer not know this? And I was like, I don't know what she's doing in these streets.
I don't know either. Not DuckTales. Not watching DuckTales in my spare time.
Well, speaking of DuckTales.
Okay.
Terrible segue. I can't. I'm bad at segues. This is why I miss Anne sometimes for the segues.
She was great at the
She was really good at segues. Okay, so not speaking of DuckTales, we have an interview with Danica today, another Instagram superstar that I ended up meeting online. And this is a very, I think, current classic Conversations with a Wounded Healer convo about like how we evolve the future of therapy and what we do in our education programs. And, Danica and I were on the same page, and we talked a little bit afterwards about, I have this fantasy, I don't know if it'll come to fruition or not, but of creating some sort of regular get together of people to sort of mastermind together around what we want to see for the future of therapy. And she was into it. So something like I just don't know. Literally, I don't know how to do all of the things that I want to do in the 24 hours that I have in a day. It's very rude that I'm limited to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand. It sounds like a manifestation circle of sorts. That could be cool.
Yeah. And thought leaders and, diverse thought, just, I don't know, people who want to be on the forefront of evolution.
Totally. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens. I'll let you guys know. I also, though, I guess I can really tell listeners officially my book that I'm going to be writing for NASW Press has been greenlit, and actually it might turn into 3 books.
Oh my God.
So I have to figure out when and how to write a book. In addition to all the other things I do. But anyway, so sure, we'll have some sort of mastermind group. It'll be amazing. But let me introduce you to Dr. Danica Harris. She is a somatic experiencing practitioner and complex trauma expert, working internationally as a coach, facilitator, presenter, and educator. Trained as a counseling psychologist, Danica prioritizes helping folks heal so they can live more embodied and empowered lives. She's deeply invested in equity, social justice efforts, and destigmatizing mental health treatment. And she utilizes her Instagram platform, The Empowered Therapist, to provide education and support the broader community. So please enjoy this convo with Danica Harris. Hello, Danica. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hi, Sarah. So nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to meet you because you're someone I've been following on Instagram for, I literally don't even know how long. And like these random Instagram connections. I just like make a comment like, "Oh, want to talk on my podcast?" And you're like, "Yeah, great, woo!" And now we're best friends.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Yeah, such great connections can be built on social media, and now I'm following you as well and loving your content. So
Oh,
glad we've
thank
connected.
you. Yeah, I mean, it's such a weird time to be. It's a weird time, period. Also a weird time, I think, to be a therapist, and I am just, like, hoarding people that are vibing and able to sort of, like I think we need, like, a cohort of people who are working on the next evolution of where it is that we
Yes.
go. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I'd love to dig into that, but first, will you tell people a little bit more about, like, who you are and what you're doing in the world?
Yeah. I'm Dr. Danica Harris. I co own a therapy practice in Dallas, Texas. And we currently have, I think, 20 therapists who are offering a variety of trauma informed support to folks, not only in Texas, but also in up to, I think, now 42 states in the US.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have a really nice reach. Really, really love my team. And that work has really, at this point, like allowed me to shift out of my therapist role and into a much greater administrative role in that practice. But, ever the healer, I don't want to be away from being able to support people on their healing journey. So I'm trained as a somatic experiencing practitioner and do somatic coaching and retreats and support for therapists, particularly therapist entrepreneurs. So kind of have a number of different things going on, but really like my whole like goal is like helping people to be gentler with themselves, show up for themselves, be present with themselves in whatever that means for them and where they're at.
Yeah. And how did you become a therapist? I love a good therapist origin story.
Yeah. My story. So I grew up working class. I'm the first person in my family to go to college on either side. So it was not in the cards for me to go and, especially not to get an advanced degree like a PhD. So I started like, what version of this story do I tell you? So when I was about a year out of high school, I was working as a makeup artist, and a client of mine actually said, "Oh, you should go to esthetician school. You're really good at this." And esthetician school is like,
Yeah.
skincare and waxing and all that kind of stuff. So I did that first, and I loved connecting with people, and I loved helping them feel good about themselves and connected to
Yeah.
themselves. And in my mind at the time, in my little like 19, 20-year-old self, I definitely didn't see it as like, oh, I'm just helping people feel beautiful. I'm helping
Yeah.
people feel like them. And then I always had wanted to go back to school. I was a really good student and just wanted to have advanced education, really wanted to go to college. Life circumstances just shifted a little bit with partnership and stuff like that. It became more of an option to me in my late 20s. So when I went back to school, I just knew I wanted to be a therapist and had intentions to get a master's degree. And then my program asked if I wanted to stay and get a PhD. And I was like, sure, yes, because I definitely
Sure.
wanted to teach. I really enjoyed teaching. And so, yeah, that was the path. And one of the things I said on my grad school during my grad school interview, that one of the professors, he was kind of jerky about it. He was like, "Well, you've done like makeup and skincare and stuff like that. Like, what makes you think you're going to be qualified to do this work that's so different?"
How dare
Um,
you?
yeah, yeah. And I just said, I actually see it as like opposite sides of the same coin. So I used to help people from the outside in, and now I'm going to get to help people from the inside out. And to me, it's the exact same job,
Yeah.
just like different intervention, right? And I still believe that to be very true.
Oh my god, yeah, my hairstylist and I joke, of course, that she is a therapist, and I sometimes, like, feed her little tips, like, "Ask questions this way, and that'll help people open up,"
Love
or so
it.
and
Yeah,
I've
love
had a
it.
hairstylist on the podcast before too,
Oh,
because,
great.
yeah, I believe we're all healers, truthfully.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
definitely can be if we tap into it.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into like what are you seeing in the profession right now? What is your vantage point and the things that you're like, ah,
Do you have all day?
I mean, yes, for you, absolutely I do.
Uh, so two big things come to mind. One being, and this is kind of how the general public experiences things in our realm, like related to trauma and terminology that people are using and things like that. It's like on the one hand, I feel really good that people know what trauma is. And I'm like putting a little asterisk even when I say that, right? Like they have a sense of what trauma is. Words like gaslighting and narcissism and things like that
Triggered.
triggered, exactly. They've all become like really mainstream, which on the one hand, I started working as a therapist in 2011. So I think about in the last 15 years with that progression has looked like. And I'm
Yeah.
encouraged that we're having these conversations. The flip side of that is when something becomes mainstream, it
Yes.
becomes murky, and people who are not necessarily trained, and I don't mean that in like an elitist or like
Right.
gatekeepy way, just people who, watched a TikTok or saw an Instagram reel and now decide like, oh, I'm some sort of expert on trauma.
Yeah.
I think that like muddies the water, right? And so that is a concern I have, is that things have become mainstream in a way that has diluted maybe the efficacy or the true understanding
Yeah.
of what it means to be a trauma survivor, what it means to experience trauma, what it means to have the experience of trauma in your body, all of that. So I think that's one big thing I'm seeing. The other thing, and I keep saying this to all the therapists on my team and the therapists that I support in entrepreneur work, um, the field is changing.
Yes.
It's really changing. And I am seeing I'm sure you are too, so much evidence of this, especially in the last 5 years.
Yes.
And I feel so encouraged by that and glad, because I think we're moving away from some of the systems and approaches and interventions and theories and all that that are really harmful to people. And at the same time, I know that there's this resistance therapists have to working differently, showing up differently. It's like we're all trained in this like adjunct medical model. And I went to a feminist multicultural program. Like we didn't learn CBT. We didn't, it's not a
Mm.
strong program on like diagnostic work. And even still, it's like we were trained to do one-on-one work with people and like maybe couples, maybe family, maybe group. And that
Mm.
was like the conceptualization of our field. And, being someone who's present on Instagram and offering a variety of different options, I know that people need so much more and often different work than that. And so I just think we're in some sort of transition with that, with a lot of therapists like death gripping onto the one-on-one hour.
Yeah, a couple things that come up for me. I wonder, as we're shifting right now, like something is going to collapse with the health insurance system, and I'm guessing Dallas is a cash pay market.
It's both,
It's
really.
both. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Chicago is very firmly an insurance only market. I'm assuming something is going to happen with the healthcare industry, which is going to make therapy less accessible, which is going to mean we're going to do more groups. I am I see what you're seeing in terms of the, like, desire to do different modalities. I fear that the gap between the education system and what's needed actually out in the world is so vast. I teach
Yep.
at a university, and I gotta tell you, like, shout out to my students that I have this semester. These students are brilliant. But in general, I've just noticed of the 10 years that I've been teaching now, they're so much smarter than I was when I graduated. And I'm guessing part of it is the program, but also I think there's just, they get a lot more of the stuff that I had never heard of white privilege until I went to grad school,
Yeah.
like, so that's a thing that is in the zeitgeist that they're
Yeah.
getting more of. And at the same time, the distrust of institutions and quote unquote authority, I see the younger therapists sort of pushing away maybe those of us who've been around the block a couple times. And I get concerned that like the elder, we're elders now, Danica,
Yeah.
that the elder wisdom is
Yeah.
not necessarily like being woven through. So yeah, that's not a question, but thoughts, reactions?
Oh, yes, 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 all of that. Yeah, so I taught for a number of years too, and I taught in a graduate program for, I guess, 4 years, and felt similarly, and it's now been a few years since I've taught in a academic setting, but felt similarly to what you're saying. In some ways, I feel like the students coming in had like this perspective and
Mhm.
vibrance that was different than when I went to graduate school. And so it's like I would never want us to quiet that
Yep.
or, not put value in that. And at the same time, I absolutely see what you're saying, where there's almost this like disregard for
Yeah.
those of us that have a foundation in this work. And we've weathered some of this evolution already. So I think
Right.
that there's, I don't want us like disregarding either. Like
Exactly.
there is something to the wisdom we have and the
Yes.
experience we have. And there is something to being fresh and, taking in like, or bringing in, I should say, like whatever's happening in the culture right now, bringing that into mental health instead of like expecting
Right.
to be taught it. you know?
Yes. Yes. And this brings up I was at Psychotherapy Networker this last
Mhm.
weekend in DC, which I enjoy in many ways. And also, it's a conference full of 5,000 therapists. So things happen. And I was in a session that I really, really loved. And I can't remember her last name, but her first name is Sarah. And she was talking about integrating spirituality
Mm.
into the room. And I couldn't help but sort of put politics in for spirituality and recognizing like we need to figure out a way to talk about politics in therapy because it is happening in everywhere. And
Yep.
somebody brought up the what a lot of consumers are doing right now is when they call a therapist they say, okay, what side of XYZ issue are you on? And the
Mm.
whole room was basically like, yeah, well, we're not going to do that because that's enabling their whatevers. And
Mhm.
I came back and ended up saying something after a bunch of people had spoken, and I said, I think I understand what you're saying, and I agree that we should have thought around it, and yet I don't think we can disregard the fact that this is happening more. What does that mean? And what does that mean the field needs to do in response?
Yep.
Because we're not getting out of this anytime soon. It's only going to get worse, at least for the next 10 years, right?
Right.
I mean, like,
Right.
based on what the astrologers and the historians are telling me.
Uh-huh.
So I want to be part of that team,
Yep.
figuring out how do we integrate, how do we find a new way of being as
Mhm.
therapists. That's what's being required of us right now. And
Yep.
I think therapists are generally such a fearful people. Of course,
Yes.
probably because of our trauma histories, but, like, how yeah, I don't think I have the answers, but I have the agency and I have the courage.
Yep.
So, that's why I wanted to reach out to you and be like, "Yeah, like, where" yeah. So, again, no questions, but go.
Mhm.
I'm so terrible at asking questions, but eliciting things is
Oh,
what
I
I like.
love it. Yeah, what I'll say is, yeah, I'm in Dallas, and so Texas has a perception of being very conservative, and I mean, policy here sucks. Like, clients are, especially in my practice, lots of clients, lots of our clinicians are very negatively impacted by what's going on at the Texas government level. And like what I'll say is if a client is asking me a question like that or asking one of our therapists on our team a question like, who did you vote for or do you vote or like what's your
Right.
political leaning? To me, that person's actually assessing safety. And
Yes.
I will always answer a question
Yeah.
to someone who's asking because they're wanting to assess safety. I think that's really different. I don't even see that personally as like self-disclosure. I know it is, but to
Right.
me it's not as personal as like, are you partnered or how many kids you have or
Right.
something that's like very specific about your lived experience, your life. I also think those questions are okay for clients to ask.
Right.
I think therapists can make choice about whether or not they answer those.
Right.
But when we're talking about someone's lived experience or identities, and they're bringing all of that and all of that vulnerability into the therapeutic space, they have every right to know, like, am I safe with you in your politic? I
Right.
think that's so reasonable. So I,
Right.
I get a little like about these therapists that are really rigid on like, I would never self disclose or I would,
Right.
it doesn't matter. I see this a lot on the therapist Facebook pages. Like I could treat anybody with any
Yeah.
political ideation, independent of how I vote. And I'm like, maybe that's true.
Right.
And for some clients, that's probably fine. And for other clients, they want to know that like your ideology, your perspective is going to be in line with my life, my livelihood, my humanity.
Right. Right. And it feels I don't know, and maybe this is just because I'm so immersed in the politics of it, but it feels harder to separate a political identity from both our values and like who we are and how we move through the world. And I think that's where like part of the confusion seems to be happening. Like there's a somebody who I appreciated an article that he wrote, and I'm gonna have him on the podcast to talk about like why he thinks we should be a bit more discerning about like when we share politics. And and because I have seen also young therapists being like, well, I just won't work with white men, and I
Mm,
think that's a problem.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a space between I'm not going to work with any white man and I know I can't work with a Trump voter or whatever that is. And
Yeah.
I also think those of us who are white, we should be working with the Trump voters because like we shouldn't put people with more marginalized identities in the line of fire. So there's a lot of gradations there, and I fear the way I see some people taking the idea that therapy is political and enacting that.
Yep.
And I believe therapy is political, and I wanna figure out, some and I know that we're never gonna agree, but I feel like there aren't enough models and there's not enough conversation about what that can look like in a client-centered, ethical, non-dogmatic way.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're highlighting here, and you mentioned this a bit ago with like the gap in education, like that education, learning how to become a therapist can't teach you the nuance you and I are describing right here,
Yeah,
right now.
right.
It's like practice teaches you the nuance. And I think sometimes folks come out of school and they're operating from like, I mean, a really like amazing aspirational ideology, right? In
Yeah.
perspective, right? And yet in practice, what does that actually mean? Like, who are you
Yes.
not meeting? And, and I think one of our jobs as person centered therapists, instead of like operating from like a medical model, people who do body based work, healing work, we need to meet people where they're at. And I don't want to be quick to discount someone based on an ideology they hold,
Right.
so long as it's not oppressive to me and my lived experience. And I'm with you on like, as white folks, like it is our job to help people, other white people, like disentangle themselves from white supremacy and, white privilege. And like, are those clients seeking us out? There's like a lot
Right.
of nuance in this. It's like, who's seeking us out? Why are they seeking us out? What can we offer them? How do
Right.
we not put our agenda front and center in the client's work, but yet still, if a client is showing up and being racist in session, do we say something about that? How do we say something about that? When, and, in what ways? And I just think there's so much nuance in this that comes from the experience of being in the field that can't be taught from professors. A lot of times,
Yeah.
professors in graduate school aren't clinicians. They haven't been clinicians since they were an intern. I mean, that was my case. Like, not a single one of them had been practicing in a really long
Yeah.
time. And, so they themselves, when they're teaching these students these theories and these intervention styles, like they're not in the nuance of how you, it's like well and good to talk about relational cultural theory and things like that. And like, oh, my client and their identities and my identities, but like, how do you actually do that in a way that doesn't harm the client and doesn't center yourself while also encouraging like difference of thought and experimentation and all of that?
Yeah. I mean, what it always comes back to, because I'm always like, okay, if I want this outcome, like I dig deep into like where is the base of where we need to start? And for me, it's the therapist's own work.
Yep.
Because if I think about how I show up, how I try to enact liberation, how I try to move through the world, it's because I have grappled with it
Yep.
internally first.
For sure.
Maybe not first, maybe simultaneously while I'm being confronted with it in the therapy room, but, that that's what I want for grad schools. I really want, but also I'm recognizing how traumatizing there are some really scary therapists out there. There's some
Yep.
really scary professors that are, like,
Absolutely.
being oppressive. So I keep coming back to I want a world where we all agree that, like, love is the most important
Mm,
thing
yeah.
rather than power and money and success. And
Right.
because America is literally grappling with our identity right now,
Hmm.
I can't wait 10 years from now to come back to this conversation and be like, "Oh, sweet little babies, you were so scared, you didn't know it was gonna happen, but, like, everything's great now." I just hope I'm projecting out into the future. So yeah, like, how could we begin to build something that's going to center our own work in graduate school, do it safely?
Yep.
I don't know.
Hmm.
Shall we dream together? Anything come up for you as I say that?
Well, I think that's another important point too. I think, just in being a professor and in working with so many therapists over the years, both, in my therapist role and then now in a coaching role as well, I just have heard so many stories of academic trauma from
Yeah.
these like counseling, psychology, social work programs. And I think some of that's about how therapists are taught to disclose in classes or expected to disclose or role play with their own stuff in front of a room full of people or with a peer they don't feel safe with, or disclose parts of their sexual history or familial
Mm.
history in a paper for a professor, without like emotional reciprocity or attunement,
Yeah.
And I think like, well, if that's how we're training therapists to like meet their own stuff, then therapists are not actually learning how to meet clients and their stuff.
That's such a good point. Yeah, like, okay, now you're making me go back to grad school when I had to do my genogram. And so for people who don't know, the genogram is like a family tree, but it's all the trauma, basically, like
Mhm.
how people communicate, how they're connected, and addiction and mental health stuff. And I remember watching like the weeks leading up to doing mine, watching everybody do their presentation and just be like, yep, this is my mom, this is my dad, these are this is that. And I was like, I'm going to sob because for the first time I was able to see patterns that I had never been able to name before.
Yep.
And I saw the differences between my mom's side and my dad's side. I saw all the addiction. I saw the suicide for the first time, like in a line of how it went. And I
Mm.
told my professor, I was like, I'm really scared I'm gonna cry.
Mhm.
And she was so sweet. Priscilla Freire, absolutely adored her, had her for several classes, still one of my favorite professors ever. And she was like, if you want to just look at me during that, you can. And she was I really trusted her. And in the end, I did end up crying in front of everyone. And I've had that experience also too in training programs since then, like when I did SP and when I did NARM, of being one of the few people who will show what's actually happening on the inside. And I thought I was crazy for a long time. And I was like, am I more fucked up than everybody? And a friend of mine said, no, you're just more honest. And you're more willing to be vulnerable and show it. I want safety for people to be able to access that. And that experience was like, it was so meaningful for my own work to be able to see that for the first time. And I don't know what it is that gives me the courage to be vulnerable. And it's because I'm a fucking performer. That's why. Because I'm like, I've cried on stage. I've had an orgasm on stage before,
Mhm.
like whatever. I've done all these things. And so it doesn't matter now. And that's
Mm.
probably honestly what does it. But yeah, I don't know. Again, saying things with no questions, but
Well, I relate to some of what you're saying because I also will allow myself, and I'm saying allow as if it's like I have to give internal permission. I know it's happening. The permission is happening without me really having to check in. Like I also
Mhm.
can become like moved or emotional. I remember crying many times in graduate school i- in response to something about my own life or something that someone else shared. And even with clients, like I find myself even doing somatic work, I find myself like emotionally moved often,
Yeah.
and to me, that's about like, there's no shame in my tears. And I think it's really good modeling, actually. Like, even in
Yeah.
like graduate school or in these training, advanced training programs, or like you're talking about, to let ourselves go there and be more human.
Yeah.
And I do think and I'm not saying like, oh, just patting us on the back, like, oh, we do this thing and everyone should, not like that. But
Right.
I just know that, like, for some people, that internal defense, that protective mechanism is so strong. And
Mhm.
there's this fear of like, well, if I go there, if I let myself be all of me in this
Mhm.
moment in front of these people, what does that mean about my felt sense of safety? And I wish people could slow down right there and be like,
Ah,
"Oh, I have something coming up in me that prevents me from fully being present right here, right now." And as therapists, as healers, people in like any healing role, if we have a defense that comes up like that, we have to tend to it, because that's going to then limit how we show up with someone else in their affect and their emotionality. And I think that really disrupts the container of healing. And to me, piggybacking on what we said earlier, this is part of what I think is changing about our field. People want human connectedness. Like,
yeah.
we are lonely. We are disconnected. We are disconnected from others. We're disconnected from ourselves. People are yearning for human connection. And if I have a defense that prevents me from connecting, I'm not, the defenses are not a bad thing. Like, we should have a protective mechanism that comes up, but being able to discern when
Right.
can this protective mechanism soften or come down a little bit. And I think there's a lot of work for healers to do there, where it's like,
Yeah.
where's your fluidity or flexibility with your own protective mechanism so that you can be available and show up not only for yourself, but also the people you're helping.
And that's making me think of a couple clients who are therapists who are probably on the opposite side of the spectrum from me in terms of connecting to vulnerability and emotion. And I'm like thinking about like what would they have needed? And again, to not that they have to show up like we do, but how could they show up in a way in their way that
Mhm.
they would feel safe and connected. And now I'm like, well, maybe everybody just has to do 5 years of deep trauma work before they go into grad school. Because when I think about some of these folks I've worked with for a while, seeing
Mhm.
the beautiful, like, unfolding, like the flower petals opening up
Mhm.
of connection to themselves after,
Yep.
having safety for a while, and then if they would have gone into grad school from that place, what would be different?
For
I don't
sure.
know.
Well, and I will say I didn't go to graduate school until I was in my late 20s. I might have been like
Same.
28 or 9, I can't
I was
remember.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
Saturn return. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that, and I had had many years of therapy at that point. I started seeing a
Mhm.
therapist when I was 15 or 16, and, not I didn't see a therapist every year up until, not that whole, like, what would that be, like 12 years, something like that. But most of that time I was in therapy, and I had already, and certainly I have grown exponentially since going to graduate school and continue to just deepen and realize, oh, this shit's never done. We're just in process for the rest of our lives.
Yep.
And I find a lot of beauty in that today.
Yeah.
But I do think the positionality with which I started graduate school, I had already done a lot of my own healing. I had already broken down some of the, like, my beliefs about myself and the world, and like this, like, harshness that I had developed in response to my childhood, to my
Yeah.
familial context. Like, I was breaking that down already. And I'm so glad. Like, I think about, like, 22-year-old Danica, had I gone to graduate school then, like, what a disaster that would have been. I
Oh,
was in no sort of position to be helping a single person, let alone
same.
myself.
Right. Right. Yeah. Where was I gonna go with that? Oh, yes. This brings up sort of what you said earlier about the kind of us being part of the medical model, the
Mhm.
difference between treatment and healing.
Yep.
And shout out to Shauna Murray Brown, who I think highlighted, that particular phrase for me for the first time. Like, we don't talk about healing because I think we've distanced ourselves from spirituality in many ways to try to legitimize it.
Yep.
But I think we're at a place where it is time to, maybe spirituality isn't the right word, but something greater than ourselves. Because
Mhm.
let's be honest too, the aliens are going to be touching down soon. Any minute now, we're going to get disclosure. But honestly, like, I think there is an expansion to recognize just beyond ourselves as
Yeah.
America, as even the Earth, to
Yep.
really think. With the James Webb telescope coming out with all these images, like, they're like, oh yeah, maybe the Big Bang isn't even real, and there are all these other ways that the universe has existed. There's so there's so much more that we can expand into now. And why did I say any of that? I can't remember what my point was.
I love it. Well, so
Thank
yeah,
you for rolling with me.
sometimes we just get, like, so passionate about something that we lose the place
It's
we're headed.
perimenopause. Like,
Oh,
what
for
is my brain?
real,
Who
isn't
knows?
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to your point though, we have to consider that there's more, period. And, like, whatever that more means, it's like people, like, really operate and conceptualize from, like, a very micro lens.
Yeah.
It's like whatever's in my microcosm. Oh, I was taught this, I do this, this is what I see, period. And I'm a big believer in healing in general requires us to consider all options, expand beyond what we know, experiment, be curious, be open, be receptive. And
Yeah.
so, if healing requires that of us, I think our field needs to really have those things at the foundation. To be perfectly honest, this is part of why I'm no longer working as a therapist myself. That is not to knock therapy. I very much believe in therapy, trained psychologist. I just, for me personally, and the healing work that I like to do and the work that I was already doing with my clients, it was becoming more and more challenging to do things like diagnose to give a super bill.
Right.
I was just like, what am I supposed to say from a medical perspective about this person? I don't want to diagnose in this instance. And with the inclusion and necessity of insurance and the way that they expect things to be built and all this, it was just starting to feel, honestly, to me in my practice, this is not about anybody else or how anyone else practices,
Yep.
but to me, it was feeling like the work I'm doing does not feel in agreement with or in alignment with the medical models, such that I want to allow more flexibility in my work even. So this curiosity, what does that look like? Does it look like pulling a tarot card with clients? Does it look like, Reiki? Does it look like getting out and going for a walk and talking about that? And I wanted to have, or doing, touch work as a somatic
Mhm.
practitioner. I wanted to have, like, all of these options at my disposal without having to worry about, like, am I doing something unethical? And I still operate in a lot of ways like a therapist would or should, but I have freed myself of needing to like work under a diagnostic model or consider like a treatment plan in the medical sense. Like I definitely still believe there needs to be a conceptualization and understanding, clarity between you and the client, but I think that there can be a lot more flexibility in how we do that when we're not
Mhm.
having to work in these more like rigid structures.
I know. And because we're at this, like, I think very particular place in late stage capitalism where the structures are trying to stay structured, and
Yep.
we are recognizing the need to expand beyond it. And of course, I think about, the need for protection for clients
Yep.
is essentially like that was the good idea behind regulatory bodies,
For
right? Is that
sure.
in
Yes.
order to, protect people, and yet it restricts those of us who are trying to do things in a more expansive way. So it's like it feels like the world, maybe it's just my awareness has become more complex, but it feels like the world has become so complex that it feels really hard to standardize anything right now.
I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, and I think this is the other. I agree with this point you just made too. It's like these regulatory bodies, ethics and guidelines, state boards, all of that. I'm not against any of that by any means. I think that sometimes our healing work is limited by it, and I really, you'll see a lot of therapists be very anti the coaching industry, and like it's not regulated, and it's kind of like wheels off, and as even someone who provides coaching services, I agree with that. But I do wish there was like a way, and this is where I think some of the nuance, who knows what's happening in our field, but I wish there was like flexibility where like therapists or people who are trained in some sort of mental health related program could show up in a true kind of classical therapeutic way. Like,
Mhm.
this is what therapy, I'm using air quotes here, therapy looks like. And that those same trained individuals could offer a different service as well. It's like, okay, well, we could also offer coaching as like a different type of modality. We can also offer things like retreats and all that. That could be housed in some way, not like where I think it has to be as regulated as it currently is, but this is where I
Mhm.
have these dreams of like still only educated, reflective people should be doing this. But the truth is so many educated people aren't doing their own work, aren't doing the reflective work to also do the healing work. So I think this is where we end up getting this like huge disconnect between the fields of like therapy and coaching. It's like there are some coaches that don't have mental health training that have done so much healing work on their own.
Yes.
And I know I work with one of them for myself, like not a trained mental health professional, and I get more out of my work with this person as a client of this person than I ever did seeing any of the therapists I've seen. So
Mm.
I know the depth can be there, but it's not. There's no way to like standardize that, or it's like, well, anybody could call themselves a coach. Well, that's dangerous, and this is where we get into
Right.
that murky territory.
Right, right. It's interesting too, as I've started to recognize the limits of our field, I've been searching outside the field, and I've been in a couple programs that were really for coaches, but I was like, "Hey, will you let me in anyway?" And in those spaces, and I think these are spaces that are attracting people who want to do their own
Yeah.
work, but in those spaces, I'm like, these people are far beyond therapists. I'm seeing, and a lot of it is in vertical development. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with that
Uh-huh.
term. Yeah. And I think that the therapists in general need to, you know, go into some of the, it's not higher and lower. It's oh my gosh, the terminology. I literally just took this class the other day and I wrote this down because I want to say it right. So I'm literally looking in my notes right now. Don't say it like this. I want therapists to evolve so that the field can evolve, because what I'm
Yeah.
seeing in these coaching programs is these coaches are evolving and they
Mhm.
are at later stages,
Yep.
and therapists are at earlier stages, crippled by fear
Yep.
from what I think is their own trauma.
Yep.
And I'm not really afraid of the field disintegrating,
Mhm.
but I guess I'm afraid of it deteriorating. And a thing you probably saw on my Instagram, I'm afraid of the backlash that is inevitably going to come towards therapists now that quote unquote everybody wants therapy, and we're
Mhm.
going to be knocked off the pedestal. So we're I guess I'm sounding the alarm, hopefully in a non-alarming way, that
Mhm.
like we got to get our shit together ASAP.
Yeah. I completely agree. Yeah, and I don't know who's gonna like lead that movement, right? Because I think that some of us that are maybe we're not totally old school, but like middle of the road. We're
Yeah.
not folks that have been practicing for 30 years
Right.
or more years, but we're not new to the field either. I wonder sometimes if it's us, like if it's our generation of therapists that can like bridge the gap between like what was and what it is
Yeah.
becoming, perhaps. It's kind of the same thing that we're seeing on a political scale too. It's like people need to be able to have discourse. They need to be able to have dialogue. We need to be able to like we can't find common ground while we're shouting at each other. And I think the field is experiencing that as well. It's like, the people who are like rigidly CBT, it's like this is the only empirically
Yeah.
valid approach to therapy, or one of the only ones. And then there's people doing somatic work that are like, are you joking? Like, of course polyvagal theory is real. And and from this place of like, well, and I mean, and I'm probably closer to that camp for sure, but it's like, well, can we see that there is value? I'll sometimes say to clients of mine, like, sometimes it is just cognitive work.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is the work that needs to be done. I think that is the healing work? Absolutely not. But like, do we need to work on ourselves from a top down perspective simultaneously with a bottom up approach? Of course we do, because
Yeah.
all of us is present all the time. And our brain is what is driving us through our life. So if we're not attending to the thoughts that dominate, we're not going to be able to have a different experience. So I think it's like we need all of us. And I mean that like both on an individual level and also on a community level.
Yeah. What do you think for you encourage you in the beginning to really seek doing your own work?
That's a good question. The first thought I have is when I was maybe a early teen, I really struggled with my mental health. I had a familial experience that did not feel overly safe. I'm the eldest daughter, and
Oh my god,
uh,
same.
highly parentified child. My mom would say at 2 years old, like, you could have adult conversations as like a mark of like,
Yeah.
how advanced I was, and that like never being a concern to her, right? And so I was like,
Did we have the same mom?
it's like on the one hand, like, the way I was reared, like, it absolutely influenced my professional success. I have a like at all costs sort of attitude. Like, I will just push through. I will keep working, and it definitely in my younger years, and I think even in establishing my business, like, I'll just figure it out. And I have this attitude of just like, I'll work harder, I'll work more, I'll keep going. And that has led to a lot of success. I often will say, perfectionism, high achievement is like the most advantageous trauma coping skill you can possibly have, because like
Yes, it
it
is.
serves you in other ways. Right. And that's true for me. Meanwhile, I think in my teenage years, I started to just really feel like other, disconnected. I definitely feel like I had experiences where I felt bullied by peers, or like I didn't fit in with my peers. Some of that was probably about like high sensitivity that I didn't have language for at the time. And I remember saying to my mom that I wanted to go to therapy. And honestly, if I'm really thinking about it, I think Oprah gave me the idea. I'll often tell people
Oh.
like I was raised on Oprah, like after
Hmm.
school, every
Yeah.
single day. I mean, again, not appropriate. Every single day after school would watch Oprah. And I think I learned about therapy there. And like, there's lots of problems with, we could like get into like, well, a child watching Oprah at a very young age is not ideal. Oprah and some of the messages she sends out, not great either. Right.
Right.
But I think that like introduced me to the concept of therapy. And I remember talking to my mom about it at some point as a teenager. And it was like, I definitely come from a family that's like, I don't believe in therapy. Like, that's not real. That's not a thing. No one in my family other than me has ever gone to therapy either. And I had to really get to a point where I was begging to go. And so I
Mhm.
got to go as a teenager. Some of that intersected with like an abusive relationship I was in. And I think my parents were kind of like at their wits' end with that.
Mm.
So it was like, well, go to a different adult to get help. But I very luckily, kind of quickly, I had a couple little like not great experiences with therapists first, and then found someone that I had like a wonderful many-year long relationship with. That really showed me what was possible. And I really believe like she instilled in me that like I could be a therapist. I could do
Mm.
this differently. I could overcome the life that I've had or what have you. And I
Mm.
think that working with her name was Marie. I think working with Marie showed me what was possible. And then that led me to being like, I could do this. Like, I want to do this work. She
Mm.
was so impactful to me. I want to be impactful to others.
That's amazing. So, are you a healer?
Definitely.
Yeah. See, I love that. Do you know what Enneagram you are?
I'm a Enneagram 2, wing 3.
Really?
Mhm.
Interest I was feeling like 8 energy, but I'm a
Well, I
yeah.
mean, I can go there.
Yeah, well, yes.
Right.
I have experienced that as well. Yeah, yeah, as you were talking, I was just sort of, yeah, thinking about there's something about the push through overachiever that creates I mean, I know for me, it wasn't real agency. It was
Mhm.
maybe inertia
Yes.
to keep moving.
Right.
And because I didn't really get connected with my agency until like literally a couple years ago. But yeah, that inertia probably just served the process of keeping going and not quitting. That's so fascinating. How do you feel about wounded healer?
Like the title, wounded
Yeah.
healer? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely a wounded healer. In some ways, I think we all are, you know? Like, even people who don't fancy themselves a healer, like, are we not all impacted by our upbringing, by our experiences, by our relationships? Like, of course we are. And, like, who's not walking around with wounds?
And like, I mean, I as a trauma therapist, I just see everything as trauma basically, and putting them in different types of categories, but in the world that we're living in now, I don't see how anybody can say they're not a trauma survivor because we're going
Oh,
through collective trauma right now.
100%. It's inescapable.
Yeah. And
And
so I
yeah, I think you either know you're a trauma survivor or you're disconnected from the trauma you've experienced, or disconnected from your body.
yeah, that's it. Absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. We've talked about a lot today, but there's probably more we could get into. Is there anything like how are you moving through this questionable time? Like
Mhm.
what gets you out of bed?
I think being able to tap into hope every single day is critically important. And sometimes that hope has to be microscopic. If it feels
Yeah.
inaccessible, like go for the most microscopic, you know, drop of hope you can find.
Yeah.
And you're kind of talking about this, I think, in a like a bigger way, right? Like you have hope that in 10 years it's going to be really different, and we're going to be having conversations about this time in a really different way. I have that too. I hope that the field changes. I hope that the world changes. I hope people show up for themselves and one another differently. I believe in people, and like foundationally, I believe in our ability to heal and connect. And because I have that as like a core
Yeah.
belief, that I can find hope if I go back to that core belief. Like this conversation brings me hope. The fact that we're
Yeah.
naming something that's occurring in a really honest way and not really worrying about how we're coming across and we're not stumbling in our language here. I this will bring me hope, and on the days that are really hard, I definitely think like building in a glimmers practice is super important. And some people will think that's cheesy, and if it's not accessible to you, that's okay. But for me, and I think one of the hardest points in the last couple of years, I had a personal experience that was incredibly challenging. And the thing that got me out of bed every day is I would say to myself, even on my hardest days, the flowers still bloom.
Mm.
And I
Wow.
just
I
returned.
literally felt that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just returned to that idea every single day, and I would say it through my tears, and I would say it while I felt like sick to my stomach, and like all I want to do is just lay here and do nothing, or like I would say like I don't even want to exist, and not in any kind of like suicidal way. Just like I want to like evaporate from this experience. I want to be away from it, and I just reminded myself like yes, and the flowers still bloom. I'm suffering, and the flowers still bloom, and so I just started looking for the flowers to be blooming, and the sun to be shining, and the cool breeze outside and the ground beneath my feet. And if I can do that, that keeps me connected to that hope as well.
That's a beautiful place to end this. Danica, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm on a couple different social media platforms, but that's where most of my work shows up. I'm on Instagram at The Empowered Therapist. You can also find me at that same name website for some of my offerings. And then Empowered Healing Dallas is the therapy practice that I co own. And you can find me at that website as well.
Well, I really hope this is not our last conversation because this was
Me
so good.
too.
We have to keep talking.
Sounds good.
Thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you.